Good afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com. I want to welcome you to another edition of the program called What's Going On, and we will be airing on Saturday on WFOV, the great radio station over there at 92.1, and we are very glad, as always, to have them as our partners here at allpointstv.com. And we are doing a program on the day before the big day with the President of the United States that's having the summit over in Singapore, and we're looking for great things to come out of that meeting between the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, and Kim Jong Un, who is the President of North Korea. And this president, if he comes out of that summit with an agreement, I am predicting that he will get the Nobel Peace Prize, and that's going to upset a lot of persons. John is going to upset a lot of people.
Oh, I can understand. I can see people like Bill Maher just being like, his head exploding. Bill Maher and all these other. And the thing is, I mean, you've been around the planet longer than I have been. My dad fought in Korea, so I should probably be more knowledgeable about this. But other than the armistice that was signed in the 50s to end the hostilities between North and South, I don't recall any president of the United States being involved in anything this crucial, this up close and personal with any of the leaders of North Korea. Yet they're not going to give him credit for it because he's not their type of person.
Yeah.
He's not he doesn't have this long history of being a parasite on the American people, and that's the reason why I hope he does get the Nobel Prize, but I doubt it because I don't even think he's going to get nominated. The
left is certainly trying to defeat this president's agenda, but I don't think that there will be any way to stop him from going to being the recipient if he is successful, because this was uncharted waters and no one had ever even contemplated being able to bring this dictator in North Korea to the table. But that is exactly what is going on here. And Kim Jong Un even begged almost for this conference to be held after Donald Trump threatened to pull out of it based upon the belligerent tone that had been adopted by the Kim Jong Un administration. So there is a lot to be gained by both sides by the agreement. And I think we're going to come out of there. I think the United States is going to come out of there looking very well. And I don't think there's any doubt about it. If the President of the United States is able to negotiate this agreement, I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that there's going to be an awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize for both of the persons involved in the negotiations, Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, to make the world a safer place by denuclearizing the North Korean peninsula. I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that this is a major achievement. And Donald Trump is doing some things that no other president has done. This is the first time we've had an American president meet with the leaders of North Korea since the armistice was signed in 1953. First of all, we'll see if there's going to be an ending of the armistice and a peace treaty signed between North Korea and South Korea. That would be a great start to finally bring an end to the war that was fought between 1950 and 1953, and to have an agreement. It's hard to believe that this war, silent war, Cold War, if you want to call it that, would have been going on all those years from the ending of the fighting up until the present time. And to not have a peace treaty, but having a ceasefire more or less during that period of time, and no president able to bring the two sides together and resolve the problems, at least as far as the war itself is concerned, is really interesting when you think about the fact that Donald Trump is achieving this in his first year as president of the United States. A little bit more than, I think it's like 500 and some odd days now that Donald Trump has been president of the United States, and he is in fact doing things that Obama couldn't do in 8 years, and Bush 8 years before that.
I don't think Obama actually had any interest in doing this. I don't really. He basically, and to defend him, maybe in a way, it's such an existing part of the culture, this hostility between North and South, Korea, and our role in that is just basically status quo. I don't see that he saw any real need to end this. I don't.
I think, John, that we have to look at, and I agree with you on that, and I think we have to look at the motive behind it. why didn't we have some accord that would have been satisfactory to both sides during the Obama administration, and before him, George Bush, before that, Clinton, and before Clinton, George Herbert Walker Bush, and even before that with Ronald Reagan, going back to, how many administrations would that be? Going back to, and let's just go back to the Eisenhower administration. Why didn't we have an accord that was one that would have resolved the conflict, at least on paper, where the two sides would have signed a peace treaty? Why do we have an armistice going all that time and nobody had taken the steps to bring about a resolution, at least of the conflict? Because the conflict still goes on until you have a peace treaty in place. And Donald Trump is achieving that as a person coming in from the outside. And we have to ask this question: why is it that an outsider was able to do what the politicians couldn't do? And that just raises another question about these politicians. And not just about their ineptitude, but also how also that book that we were talking about in the studio a couple of weeks ago, called War is a Racket. And these politicians, they are really something when you look at how they fan conflicts. I don't think they have a real vested interest in resolving conflicts, because they make use of it. Lots of money transferred out of the Treasury to pay for wars. A lot of overcharging for those things that you need to prosecute a war, and a lot of money is being made by persons that are on the sidelines that don't put their lives on the line on the battlefield, but they're the ones that, as mercenaries, financial mercenaries, they make some financial gain from these wars, these conflicts that continue to go on long after the fighting is ended. You put troops over there, and you got to supply the troops. You got to put ammunition over there, and you got to have some rations that are provided for the soldiers, and it's like a money laundering that goes on. Donald Trump is achieving what has not been achieved since the Eisenhower administration.
What's weird though is you never heard of Donald Trump before he was candidate Trump and now President Trump. You never actually heard where he stood about these protracted wars. And a lot of people who are real critical of him because of his ties to business, evil business. Okay, but he seems to be, okay, by doing this, it might be an unintended consequence, but if he had stopped some of that money going into military operations all over the globe, and this could actually result in that, down the road. He actually is in some people's eyes, and maybe the guys who are just corporate interest people alone, would see this as a betrayal. And so he might actually, but the thing is, I think he's got the best interests of the United States overwhelmingly at heart, much better than these people who've allowed this to continue. Just like we allowed the situation with Castro and Cuba going on for the 50s, that situation there, and North and South Korea, we allowed that. Basically just, okay, poof, now we're on to something else. We went on to, right after that, we went on to Vietnam. It's like, and poof, poof. Just a series of wars we've been into, and basically we still have troops stationed in South Korea, and staring up at a DMZ between North and South, because my brother-in-law was part of that back in the 80s. So it's not like we totally left these, and every time we have, like you're bringing up, every time we do this, we have people entrenched in there. We have people entrenched in Europe yet. We have people entrenched here. We have people entrenched in Japan. We had them in Okinawa for years. We had them entrenched in Cuba, Gitmo down there in Cuba. We still got them down there. And the thing is, you're right. It cost a lot of money to support all this stuff, and it just disappears on the radar. What's going on with those places?
John, you're making a very good point. I think that it's pretty clear that war is big business. And I read somewhere, and I can't think what book it was in, but I read somewhere recently that we have not been out of war since the founding of this nation for more than 5 years straight.
Right, yes.
5 year period.
Yeah.
I read that book. I think that might have been the book, John, that you gave me.
War is a Racket?
War is a Racket.
Yeah, but let's face it, we're 240 years old. I think there was only an interim period of, I can know of, maybe 15 years or so, 18 years between First World War and Second World War. And then it was like during the 1913 era, we put the personal income tax, which now is a great source of fuel for the fire, basically for military operations. And it's really ironic that Eisenhower, a career man in the military, in this farewell address, warned of the military-industrial complex. He warned it. Now, this was a Republican, not your peacenik. They always want to depict themselves as peaceniks. The Democrats are fine with war. They're fine with war. Matter of fact, they have sent more troops into harm's way than any of the Republican presidents, exception maybe during the Civil War. They've done that.
I remember the comment that was made by Eisenhower on January the 17th, 1961. This was 3 days before the inauguration of John F. Kennedy as president, 35th president of the United States. And I do remember that speech you're talking about, John, in terms of him warning against the military-industrial complex, which was something he was facing that was about 5 years in the making before he became president in 1950. He was elected in 52 and then took the inauguration in 53. The CIA, which is part of that apparatus he was warning us about, had been set up under Truman in 1947. And he was talking in that before he left office. This was 3 days before the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. He warned about the military-industrial complex. And when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, November the 22nd, 1963, I do remember them asking Dwight Eisenhower for a comment. And he made a very interesting statement even then. He said that the American people are not going to be stampeded. And I thought that was very interesting, John, that he would make that statement, because I think he knew there was more to it than this public face they put on the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which I've been looking at that for the last 40 years or so, just looking at different parts of what really went on in Dealey Plaza. And what I consider now from the evidence that I've been able to study, reading a lot of the books out there, some of which have been not mainstream, such as Whitewash by Harold Weisberg, the 3 volumes that he put out, and the work of Harold of Lane, what's Lane's first name, and some of the books that have come out that put a real question out there about what really went on in Dealey Plaza. But one of the things that's very clear is that we were told as the official story through the Warren Commission report that what they said happened in Dealey Plaza is not what happened. And this idea that the shooting came out of the barrel of a gun fired by one man, Lee Harvey Oswald, that can't be true, because the president was shot from the back and by the front, and the president was hit at least 4 times. With multiple bullets being shot in Dealey Plaza. And I have seen the filming, the Zapruder film, and I have watched that film many times to see the shots. I'm convinced that the Warren Commission report is nothing but fiction, official fiction, put out by the government. In other words, there was a conspiracy to kill the president, and then there was a conspiracy, furthermore, to cover it up once the assassination had taken place. So anyway, to make a long story short, what I'm getting at here is that there are some forces out here that are operative in this country that we are having uncovered. If you know what you're looking for and know what you're looking at when it is uncovered, you see that there is a deep state apparatus in place in this country. And it's being exposed through it was exposed even more so through the election of Donald Trump, because a lot of these deep state operatives are now coming out of the woodwork to oppose this president. And we didn't know. We knew there was something going on. That was something in addition to whom we elect into office. We didn't know exactly what the apparatus looked like, but we did know, and we could see that there's something else to what is happening in this country, just by other than the 3 branches of government that are ordained in the Constitution of the United States. There's another apparatus here that is not ordained, that is operative, and calling some of the shots in this country. And we know about the separation of powers and all things set into orbit by the framers. But what else is there? And that's what Eisenhower was talking about. And some of that is even beyond that point.
You know, the idea of the deep state, though, if you actually read history, like you read the Bible, you read other historical accounts of other countries and their governments and stuff, even when they had kings, the deep state was always there. They were the entrenched people who had a vested interest in keeping things status quo and didn't want any change in that because their jobs, their careers, and their fortunes were based upon that. And we always think that we applaud ourselves, that we can change the faces and, who's the senator, congressman, whatever area. Oh, we had such great freedom. The thing is, we don't look deep enough to say how there should be an apparatus to make sure there's a shakeup and a turnover amongst those organizations, such as the alphabet soups, organizations of the government. That's what and if you watch the movie The Last Emperor, when the eunuchs were forced out, and then there was a fire in the House of Records, which probably would have been, if they had opened that up, they would have found that there was a lot of stuff missing from stealing it and pilfering it. That's the reason why they burned those records. And if you saw that in the movie, well, you also see that throughout history. I mean, there's always, coalitions within factions and within government. So, I mean, if you got to read history, and that's where the value of history is, to show you the insidiousness of human nature.
Yes.
That's what it is.
And John, the insidiousness of government itself, that hidden hand we were talking about before, where you see these people, these public officials putting their hand inside of their coat or their shirt or their vest. I saw the last time I saw an official doing that was Prince Harry, who just got married to Meghan Markle. And whenever I see that, I always go back to these hidden messages that are being transmitted by these public officials as they're talking to each other in signals that the laymen are not supposed to recognize, but they have their own language that is peculiar to them. Although if you study history, you can go back and look at the ways in which it's been used in the past. And I go all the way back to ancient Egypt, quite frankly, in terms of how this foundation for that was laid in ancient times. And we come all the way through all the other quote unquote antillas, which is who the politicians are who have wielded power, because that dynamic has not changed. They still are the hidden perpetrators. Government is a hidden force. It is, first of all, force, but it's a hidden force in terms of them using force, those persons who are in government using force in order to maintain control over the population over whom they will power. And all governments do it. Some do it more so than others. Some do it more out in the open than others, but all governments do it, including the government of the United States. And we're now finding out the deep state in this country, which we should have been aware of some things prior to it, because they've been revealing themselves in very obvious ways when you go back and say, well, that's what I saw in this particular case. Give an example. We're now seeing James Comey, who was the director of the FBI, John Brennan, and Clapper, and all of these intelligence, these leaders of the intelligence community. We were seeing how they were giving information out to the press, leaking information, and trying to undo the election of 2016 when Donald Trump got in there. To everybody in the intelligence community surprise, and to the surprise of most of the people in America. People were surprised by this outcome. But they had set up an apparatus through this idea of there being collusion, which they made that up. And they've been investigating this 2 years now, have found no collusion, and they know they're not going to find any collusion. That's why they keep on trying to draw Trump out into an obstruction case. And that's a whole thing we can say about that. But they are trying to undo this election. But Donald Trump has brought them out of the woodwork. When they were leaking things to the media, we saw the same thing happen in Watergate. Everybody was wondering, who is Deep Throat? Who is the leaker that was feeding information to Carl Bernstein and Robert Woodward, Bob Woodward, who wrote the book and the film based on the book called All the President's Men? The question was, all these years, who was Deep Throat that was in fact feeding information to these reporters? The leaker. Who was the leaker in that case there? And the leaker, as we found out, as he was on his dying bed, he wanted to be revealed before he died and wanted to be able to authenticate that when they verified it was this official. If he had died and then Bernstein and Woodward have said it was him, how would you verify that? Well, before he died, he did give permission to tell who the leaker was, and they then revealed his name, and he verified it was him, and it was a person by the name of Mark Felt. Mark Felt was the assistant director of the FBI. And so when you look at what Mark Felt did and who he was and how he was positioned in government, you saw a glimpse of the deep state. We're seeing it big time with Donald Trump, but it was the deep state operating then. And the deep state did around the Constitution to remove a president of the United States. Because here's the way it should have gone. You know, we can remove a president of the United States by the Constitution. But this was extra constitutional, what happened to Richard Nixon. They had a coup d'etat right in front of the American people's eyes, and it did not go through the provisions found in the Constitution in Article 2, Section 4. We have a way of, if a president is in fact creating crimes while in office, there's a way to remedy the situation and remove the president for the violation in Article 2, Section 4. Here's what it says. I can quote it, but I want you to see me reading it so you won't think I'm making this up.
Yeah, because he can quote from, he's got that memorized. I mean, I'd like to put him, that constitutional scholar, Barack Obama.
He would be in the contest.
You'd have to have the book out. You could quote chapter and verse, whatever.
Obama doesn't know anything. Obama is one of the biggest frauds in the history of the American presidency, and I'm here to tell you in case you don't know it. This man was a total fraud. And one day we're going to do a program on Barack Obama and how he duped the country. Not because he was not an American citizen, he was an American citizen, but running as a black American and then using that as the basis to run his campaign and all that was fraudulent. Because Obama is not an American based upon his father, and therefore he does not get his citizenship or his American citizenship, through which he ran as a black American. He doesn't get his black American identity from his father. He gets his American identity from his mother. His dad is over in Kenya. And so running as a person that would grab onto the history of blacks in this country, going over there and standing on the steps of the State House in Springfield, Illinois, and standing over there like Abraham Lincoln freed anybody in his family. Give me a break. This was a lifting of the history, a usurpation of the history of blacks in this country, and blacks have not awakened yet to how this man created a fraud against their history. And he stood up there and took their history and ran on it, and then when he got into office, forgot the person whose name he was running for president, and never even looked their way. Never even went back to Chicago and tried to stop some of the killing over there. And I don't know if you noticed this past weekend, they had several more people killed in Chicago. And the number of persons killed since the first of the year is now 1,070 killed in Chicago since the first of this year. Any of you football players kneeling because of that, by the way?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to know that. I mean, the police brutality is an issue that we got to address. I agree with that. It's been going on for years, and I think that the cops should be realizing that people have cameras on their phones. We should probably knock this stuff off. We got our granddads with their cops. They got away with it because nobody could, is our word against theirs. But now it's not. Okay, so they should address this. But why don't they decry the violence done by black on black crime and within black communities? Why don't they do that? So,
and decry not only decry black on black crime, but going to the work and the research done by Heather McDonald, black on white crime. The media is putting out this notion that blacks are under siege in this country because of their race, and there's a certain amount of innocence attached to all of these things that are happening to blacks in this country, but the statistics don't bear that out, and we've got to stop lying in this country. We got the liberals got to stop lying about that issue, and blacks have got to stop lying also. because blacks attack whites in this country more than the other way around. And that's a statistical fact that you cannot get away from by just simply covering it up, because the lying media, fake news, is not covering the we talk about black on black crime, but what about black on white crime? If you go I looked at the stats, and I know that there's a cover up going on here to keep black people angry, because when you're angry, you cannot reason. And if you can't reason, you can't solve your problem. And there's a group of people in this country that do not want the black problems resolved. We'll talk about that also in the last part of the hour. We'll come back with WFOV in 4 minutes, and they'll be taking their hiatus for the next 4 minutes. We'll welcome them back at 30 minutes into the program. We want to continue what we're doing here. I do want to go back to this point I was making about deep throat and what that means. We had a coup d'etat in this country when Nixon was overthrown. There is a way to remove a president of the United States, and it's not through the Washington Post and the New York Times. That's not the way you remove a president, by in fact keeping Watergate in the news for 2 years, and then having the American people to think that the problem was more serious than it was. I mean, that's corruption. The government is corrupt. That's what government is. All governments are corrupt. There are no governments that have any integrity. And that's not just true in North Korea.
Look at the corruption that we're talking about is not necessarily payola. It's basically not what you're pointing out to and alluding to already, is simply not following through with what the law is established to do. They circumvent that. That's also corruption. So everybody thinks when they hear corruption, it's payola or payoffs. It's that, but it's also not following the established guidelines that they're supposed to engage with.
And here are the established guidelines, John. The Constitution I'm holding up right now, for those of you that listen to it on radio on Saturday, I'm holding up right now the Constitution of the United States. Every person that's in Washington right now, and that's every politician that's not in Washington, those that are in these state legislatures, the governorships, and all the others, those that put their hands on the Bible and swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States, every last one of those persons is lying, without exception. This document is not being upheld by these politicians. They're in violation of it. And when they say that I hereby swear and all of that, they're swearing to a lie. They're not going to uphold this document. And that's what Jefferson and others understood about why you have to have a constitution. They said that if men were angels, they said if men were angels, we would not have to have a constitution, and if a government was angels, we would not have to have written laws to restrict their power. I mean, that's in essence what this amounts to. If people were just ethically inclined, you wouldn't have to have rules that would in fact modify, and you wouldn't have to have government, first of all, because people would act ethically toward other persons as they interact with other people. But you have to have a government because they're not going to act ethically. There'll be some that take advantage of others. But if governments were ethical, you wouldn't need a constitution. And we have a constitution because government is not ethical. And we're wasting our time waiting for government to act in an ethical way. You have to hold these persons down. This is what the intention of the Constitution was, to chain government down, to separate the powers and have each of the government's askings of his own power defined in the first 3 articles of the Constitution, and to have those powers limited to that branch of government, another set of powers limited to the other branch of government, the third branch will check on those two check on the third, and vice versa, and they would have checks and balances in place because each one could go out of control, and all of them out of control. Every branch of government in this country right now is out of control because they're run by politicians, and there are politicians sitting on the bench and running a shard of the Constitution. But here's what it says in the way we remove a president in Article 2, Section 4. I mean, it's very clear. Okay, I want to welcome you back from WFOV, and thank you for coming back. In Article 2, Section 4, which is what we were talking about before you left, it says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office. Listen to this very carefully. Upon impeachment for and conviction of. It's a two-tiered process. You have to, first of all, remove a president from office or another civil officer of the United States. That means all federal officers, by the way, can be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, Richard Nixon, who was the Johnson was 36, so Nixon was 37, Kennedy was 35. So the 37th president of the United States was removed from office not by Article 2, Section 4, but was removed from office by a coup d'etat run by the media in this country. And because we now know that the intelligence community is trying to run Donald Trump out of power, because we now recognize that the deep state is made up of the intelligence community. We see the media involved in it in terms of the cover-up, and they covered up the Kennedy assassination. They didn't do any investigation of that murder. They were very quiet about it. That murder could not have been carried out by Lee Harvey Oswald. And in fact, the conspiracy starts out at the moment of the assassination, well, before the assassination, obviously, but in the aftermath of it, you see the operation beginning to operate at the very moment that the shooting stopped, because the police officer ran into the wrong building. Those bullets were not fired from the 6th floor of the school book depository, and I'm here to tell you in case you didn't know it. Those bullets were fired by the X building, the building that's on the other side, because there's not even a clear shot through those bushes from the 6th floor of the school depository. Those bullets were planted there beforehand, because they had intended ahead of time to frame Oswald. But the problem with that framing of Oswald, in case you didn't know this, is that Oswald is on the 2nd floor of that cafeteria drinking a Coca-Cola when the police officer ran into the wrong building. He's going to run to the 6th floor. The problem was that Oswald was on the 2nd floor. This was a conspiracy that was well planned. And I can tell you who's in that, and I can tell you who's up there in that firing squad, making that noise. But the killers were in that Dell Tax building. And if you want to know whether go look at the Zapruder film, folks, because we don't think we have coup d'etats in the United States. We've had 4 presidents killed in this country. 4. And every last one of them, guess what, was done by a lone gunman. If you believe that, then you're brainwashed. The president is the most powerful person in the world and the most protected person in the world, unless his security breaks down. You can't get to a president of the United States. You can't get to Abraham Lincoln, who's the first president was killed. His security broke down. And John Wilkes Booth went in the place where he was in the Ford Theater, went in the door and shot him from the back right in the booth where he was in fact watching the play. Where was his bodyguard? Rathburn. And go look at that motor. I have to tell you, I went to when Donald Trump came to Michigan this last time. He was over there in Washington, Michigan, and I was going to leave early. I went there with a friend. We were going to leave early because we wanted to get a head start in getting out of there, because there's a lot of folks there. Many of us, we had to stand outside with so many people, we couldn't even get inside the arena. And we were trying to get a head start to get out of there. And we went down to the end of what amounted to this big field that we were in, and where the arena was located. And when we got down to the end of it, they had to cordon off, and they would not let anyone out into the area where the cars would be. If the president was going to be in the motorcade, they didn't want anyone out there that would be out in the street at the time the motorcade would have the president being in the motorcade passing by, because they didn't want to have the president's car stop or slowed down, because anyone that wishes the president harm could do harm. So they wouldn't let us out. We stood there 45 more minutes because they didn't know what time the president was going to stop speaking, and they didn't want to have any interference in the motorcade once the president's route was in fact going from the arena back to wherever he was going from that site. I only make that point to show you that, and by the way, there were a lot of the president's cars, the two cars, they had two limousines, and you couldn't tell which one the president was in, but there were a lot of cars ahead of the president's limousine, and there were a lot of cars in back of it, and an ambulance in the motorcade route in case something might have happened where the president might have needed medical attention, or somebody in his entourage was in need of medical attention. It was right there on the spot. When I look at that, and that happened when I was over there, and I look at what happened in Dealey Plaza, you don't tell me that was insecurity there. The president's car is a lead car. Go look at that. Go look at this approved film. The president's car is the lead car in that motorcade. This is a coup d'etat in this country. They disagreed with the election outcome. Kennedy got in there and did some things that Eisenhower had warned against in terms of the military-industrial complex, which he talked about 3 days before the inauguration of John F. Kennedy, because he saw it out of control. And then when the assassination of Kennedy happened 2 years into his administration, with Kennedy being inaugurated in 1961, within 1,000 days of him being president, John F. Kennedy is murdered. And Eisenhower said the American people will not be stampeded, which was kind of code language for the fact that they're not going to be herded by this apparatus that he was warning the people about 3 days before the inauguration. He had warned the American people that the apparatus was there because he saw it when he was president, and he warned against it, and knew when the killing of Kennedy had occurred, he knew what that was about. In fact, you'd be surprised by how many persons were in Dallas when this assassination took place. Look at some of the names. I would go do some research and look at who was there in Dealey Plaza when this killing occurred. The deep state was very much involved in the background, and you can go read this book by I'll give you a document. You can go read this book by Charles Ashman called The Mafia CIA Link, or read this book by De Lorenzo, Organized Crime. Thomas De Lorenzo's book, The Unvarnished Truth About Government, because government is what Michelle Malkin wrote about, gangster government. That's what these persons are. They're gangsters. Don't come telling me about Democrats and Republicans. These are gangsters, and many of these gangsters are hoping that Donald Trump will fail. They're hoping he'll fail because if he succeeds, the American people are going to catch on to the fact that they're being duped. If Donald Trump can do this work in Singapore and come away with a victory after all the politicians, going back to Eisenhower. After Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy. After John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson. After Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon. After Nixon, you had Gerald Ford. After Ford, you had Jimmy Carter. After Carter, you had Ronald Reagan. After Ronald Reagan, you had George Herbert Walker Bush. After Bush, you had William Clinton. After Clinton, you had George W. Bush. And then you had Obama. Every last one of them, politicians who couldn't solve this problem, never met with the North Korean leadership, and they've had three different dictators since the ending of the war. Starting with Kim Jong Il Sung, and then Kim Jong Il, and now Kim Jong Un. Three different family members have run that country ever since the ending of the war that started in 1950. Now Donald Trump is over there meeting with Kim Jong Un, and they hope he does not succeed.
How about these progressives? Always talk about white privilege. How about these people in communist countries like in Korea and Cuba? When the old man dies, the kids get it. Just like in Cuba, the brother died, the other brother gets it. And I mean, if you talk about privilege, it's unassailable. But they don't say anything bad about that, do they? That kind of privilege, do they?
They don't say anything about it, John. And we have got to stop allowing these people to tell us what the news is, and we accept that without any investigation on our part to find out what they're reporting to us is true or not, because they're giving us false information all the time. This idea of fake news, this didn't start with the Donald Trump administration. He's just the one to call attention to it, and they don't like it. He's the one that is, in fact, bringing public exposure to it. At all of his rallies, he points at the media and says, this is fake news that they're putting out there, and it is fake news. And it's been fake for a long time. It didn't start with this administration. It's just that Donald Trump is an outsider. He's the first one putting a public glare on it. But this has existed for a long time, and they ran a coup d'état in this country without any question. In 1974, August the 9th, 1974. When Richard Nixon resigned, there was no constitutional order to that putting him out of office. The Constitution says a president can be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of. You can't even remove a president for impeachment. You have to bring about the charge first, and then you have to try him on the charge. That's why we've never had a president that has been removed by the impeachment process. Because the framers made it difficult. But they hounded Nixon out of office. And they ran a coup d'etat right in front of the American people, and they never even saw it. I'll tell you another thing you didn't see, because the president called attention to it. You didn't even see this part of it. When they elected the president in 1972, Spiro Agnew was the vice president of the United States. Can you get to that? It was Richard Nixon running from California, and it was Spiro Agnew running from Maryland. So on the two coasts, you had, how they try to make sure that they get constituents on this side and constituents on that side. Of course, the Constitution does not allow you to have the president, vice president running from the same state. So that's part of it as well. But basically, you want to try to appeal to different regions of the country in order to have a balance in your ticket, so that it won't be two persons from the South, for example, or two persons from the East Coast or from the West Coast. You want to try to have one person over in this part of the country, another part of the country as well, and tie those two regions together and then get the most electoral votes out of it in order to elect the president. So, but they had Richard Nixon running for president in 1972, and he was running from the state of California. Didn't think he'd ever run again because he had been defeated twice prior to running again for president in 1968. He had run for the presidency in 1960, was defeated by 100,000 votes. When Kennedy defeated him, you can go and look at that election and have a lot of things to say about that. And then ran again for governor in 1962 in California and lost to Brown's father, Jerry Brown, who's now the governor. His father defeated him in 1962. We thought Nixon was going to ride off in the sunset. That's the end of his political career. But the assassination occurred in 1963. You'd be surprised who's in Dallas. I said that earlier, right? You'd be surprised who's in Dallas during that time period. And we got to ask questions about why the person that were there. You'd be surprised. Go and read it. Go find out who was there. Some people that later on be in that office, they were in Dallas. But after the assassination of Kennedy, a lot of things became possible that were impossible prior to that. But when they shot him out of office and ran a coup d'etat in this country, a violent coup d'etat in this country, a lot of things that were not possible prior to that became possible in the aftermath of that. I'm telling you what I know. I'm not telling you about conjecture. I studied this case. I spent 40 years on this case. Not 40 years constant. I just kept doing further and further investigation as more and more information came out. And I'm certain of these facts. This, in fact, we try to figure out how the shooter was able to shoot upward, because the one shot that hit the president in the head, two shots really hit the president in the head, hit the president in the head simultaneously, about 1/100th of a second apart. That right there shows conspiracy of the shooters, because you can't fire that 6.5 Italian kind of rifle. That's a bolt action rifle.
Yeah, it's a seriously flawed weapon too. I mean, it was
a flawed weapon as well,
because it was considered one of the worst shoulder-held weapons during in modern times. It's considered one of the worst. I have one in my collection.
Well,
and it's like it's very hard. I mean, I tried dry fire, which means not shooting ammo through it, just dry fire it, and I couldn't get it as fast. I mean, I couldn't get to my shots placed. I couldn't get the shots off without being, much less, with accuracy, to hit a target, moving target, going around a curve, underneath a tree where you couldn't really. I mean, I have a hard time seeing that. Another thing is too, if you see the Zapruder film, you see the part of his skull of the president go over, fly off his skull and go to the back, to the rear of the, and it's on the trunk of the car.
Yep.
So I mean, I've shot many things, hard substances like pots and pans, ceramic pots and stuff like that in the firing range, and when you shoot it. It travels the way the bullet's traveling, though. The debris is going to travel that direction. It had to come from the front. In my opinion, it had to come from the front.
Yeah, the one that, John, the incredulity of the claim that's made, because they don't have respect for us out here. They think the American people are stupid, and they take them for fools to put that report out. And the way they did it was they tied all hands of the government to the report, so they would not do an investigatory, they put forth no investigatory efforts, because they tied every aspect of the government to the report that's put out, this fictional report they put out called the Warren Commission Report. First of all, Earl Warren, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John J. McCloy. That was Wall Street involved in it. Richard Russell and Hale Boggs. Richard Russell from Georgia, the senator from Georgia. Hale Boggs from Louisiana.
Okay, was he the Supreme Court justice at the time of this, when he was appointed to be head of this commission?
That's why they put him there.
Now, see, I don't think that's actually under the purview of any Supreme Court justice. I mean, underneath his duties. Do you?
No.
I don't know if that's expelled out in the Constitution.
John, they had to. The American people would be a lot more sophisticated now than it was then, than they were then. They put these persons up there that had this public persona, because they were going to put this report out that showed no conspiracy, a single shooter, and all of that. And in order to make people believe the unbelievable, they had to put some public figures on it that people could identify with. So Earl Warren was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. They put him up there to head the commission. But you think he headed the commission? Earl Warren had duties as a member of the Supreme Court. The one that actually headed that commission was Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles, John, who was the CIA director that Kennedy had fired. You aware of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was Dulles Airport's named after him.
After him, that's right. Allen Dulles.
Right. So I mean, it's just, to me, it's just like this is congealing, because I pretty much years ago I think, Oswald was a real discontented individual. He was a communist sympathizer and all this stuff. But then also begs the question immediately. If you surrender, renounce your citizenship, you're not supposed to be allowed to back in the country. Not only was he allowed back in the country, he was allowed to bring back a Russian bride with him. Okay, and that's a big, especially in that era. Why wasn't that no pun intended, the red flag? Mm-hmm. Okay, why wasn't that on that flag, on that action? Why wasn't that brought up? Another thing is too, and that's not conspiratorial. They just simply weren't following the law at the time when they were supposed to follow that, especially in that era with the tension so high between the Cold War. This was at the peak of the Cold War, and this guy was allowed to come back after renouncing his U.S. citizenship with a Russian bride. I don't understand why he was allowed back in the country.
Because he was CIA operative is why he was allowed back in, and why he even went over there. This person, Oswald, was tied to the intelligence community, but he was not one of the person that did this shooting, and he's exactly right. And he told the press when they said, "Did you shoot the president?" And he said, "No, I'm a patsy." And he said that because he then recognized why he was being sent to all these different places to create a paper trail. That gun that was ordered was ordered on the name of a person by the name of Hydell, and they traced that gun to Oswald, and they put his fingerprints on it in the aftermath of his death. I'm just saying that the conspiracy was well set up, and they framed Oswald. Oswald didn't do any shooting on that day. Didn't kill anybody. Didn't kill Tippit, and didn't kill Kennedy. Certainly didn't kill Kennedy. This was a well orchestrated, well thought out, well planning evidence in that case, and we have not brought any of those killers to justice. One of them, by the way, James Fowles is in jail right now for another charge. James Fowles is one of those persons in the Grassy Knoll. But the president wasn't just shot from the Grassy Knoll area. There's some shooters there too. But when we looked at that shot and see the president's body going upwards and then back, that shot didn't make any sense from the Grassy Knoll area either. Because how does the president's body go upward? That shot was fired upward. We're trying to figure out how could that happen. Well, we now know why it happened, because the footage of that, when you put the Zapruder film in the place where that shot was in fact fired, it made no sense until we recognized that the shot had come from the sewer. There's a person hiding in that drain in Dealey Plaza. That's why that one guy that was mute, that couldn't speak, testified that he saw a guy coming out of that area, or where could walk through that sewer area and go get off that main street, and he saw this guy disassembling the gun and throwing it to this person, put it in the suitcase, and walked away as if they were railroad workers. This thing was highly orchestrated. And the only point I'm making is this: our government is just as corrupt as any government on the planet right now. That's not what the difference is made. And the difference is made in terms of those who are the producers. And Donald Trump comes in to a cesspool, draining the swamp. This is not a swamp. This is a crime syndicate. This is not a swamp. A swamp is something that exists because there is a natural, discourse. Nature has created a swamp. This is not a swamp. This is a crime syndicate. This is what De Lorenzo is talking about when he talks about organized crime, the unvarnished truth about government. The government is a crime syndicate, and they are going to do everything they can to protect their vested interests. And their vested interest is not in the public, order, who you elect the government, and so on and so forth, because they don't have interests that fade according to who's elected to office. They have permanent interests. And whoever gets in office, those permanent interests remain regardless as to the politician. In fact, what I like to see happen to resolve that problem, it can be resolved. Every time we have an election, we get rid of all the members in government that are in there as careers. And whenever you have a president comes in, he brings all the folks in that he appoints, because we elected that person. He brings all the persons in the federal government that are not elected to the House of Representatives and the House of Senate, and the president appoints those other persons he brings in from the administration. That way we can hold the president accountable for it. But there's an apparatus when the president comes in, it's already there. The apparatus of government is already in place by these careers, and that's where the deep state is located. They stay there. And they stay there orchestrating, as was done by Brennan, by Comey, and by Clapper. Those three guys, those three hoodlums should be in jail. These are hoodlums. And they're trying to undermine Donald Trump. But if Donald Trump he's in Singapore, they're going to have the negotiations starting tomorrow. If those negotiations go well, and Donald Trump does what they were saying they could not do, and they were carrying pallets of money over there and buying, putting American money in their hands and so on and so forth. If he succeeds, then the question is going to be raised, why is it that they could not get this job done and took an outsider with no political experience now, never held elective office, come from nowhere and runs for president and is able to put in place a formula for solving a problem that none of all those presidents I mentioned was able to solve. How was he able to do that? And you cannot do it and explain it unless you're talking about treason. And that's what I'm talking about. The Mafia-CIA link. And one person that was down there in Dealey Plaza, as a matter of fact, said she could not, being one of the person that was dating this was Judith Exeter. It was dating both Kennedy and dating Sam Giancana, who was a godfather. She said she couldn't tell where one started and where the other stopped because the merger, Charles Ashman's, the Mafia CIA link, the merger between those two is so fine, you can't tell where the line of demarcation is. You can't tell where the Mafia starts and where the CIA starts because they're married to each other. Both of them are organized crime. It's only that the government's organized crime is legalized by the fact that they have the right to initiate force because they're the legal arm of the organized gangsterism in this country. If I would say that all politicians are thugs, you would not believe that. That you cannot have a government and not in these circumstances where they've broken underneath the Constitution, you cannot have a government under these circumstances and not have gangsterism. Because this document here that I'm holding up, the Constitution of the United States, they have already thrown this aside. This Constitution does not apply anymore. It is what Napolitano writes about in his book called The Constitution in Exile. They have exiled this document. It is no longer applicable in the United States. Donald Trump wish you well over there in Singapore. We know that you have the talent to get this job done, and when you do it and come back, we have to raise the question why this could not have been done before, and what are we learning from the fact that you were able to do what the politicians could not do, and why would that be the case? Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.